Tom Platz is sometimes referred to as the uncrowned champion of 1981, a title he never officially won. He helped train one of the most dominant bodybuilders in the history of the sport, a man who went on to win 6 consecutive Mr. Olympia titles. Yet Platz receives little credit for that contribution. He stood on the biggest stage in his sport and made an announcement that many in the fitness world described as an unprecedented act of defiance. Now, at 70 years old, Platz has spoken at length about Dorian Yates, the man who surpassed him competitively, the man Platz helped develop, and the man who, when they first met face to face, could barely manage a single word. What follows is an account of 2 significant figures in bodybuilding, a complicated history between them, and what it means for a mentor to watch a student achieve what he himself never did. It also raises a question that remains genuinely open. Which of the 2 was the greater bodybuilder? Tom Platz arrived in California in 1978 with $50. He had just completed his degree, earned his credentials, and made the decision to move to Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, the center of competitive bodybuilding at the time. His intention was to train alongside the leading figures in the sport and to win the Mr. Olympia. Gold's Gym in the late 1970s was a training environment unlike any before or since. Arnold Schwarzenegger trained there. Franco Columbu trained there. Frank Zane, known for his precision and symmetry, trained there. These were the athletes who had moved bodybuilding from a subculture into something with broader public visibility. When Platz arrived, young and unknown, they did not ignore him. They helped him. Schwarzenegger took Platz aside and offered practical guidance on building a career in the sport. Frank Zane, a 3-time Olympia champion, intervened at a moment when Platz was losing confidence and considering returning home. Zane told him to wait 2 months. He said people would see him, that he would appear in the magazines, and that there would be demand for what he offered. Zane was right. Joe Gold, the gym's founder, extended Platz a lifetime membership, something he reserved for the sport's established elite. Within a short period, Platz had built a reputation that spread through the training community, not for his arms, his chest, or his overall size, but for his legs. At that time, serious squatting was rare in competitive bodybuilding. The prevailing view was that squats widened the waist, flattened the glutes, and placed the knees at risk. Most athletes relied on lighter isolation movements, prioritizing control and proportion. Platz got under the bar. He squatted with a depth and intensity that looked less like exercise and more like some kind of primal ritual. He would go until his quads seized up, until the rest of the gym stopped moving and simply watched. His legs began to grow in a way that seemed to defy the accepted limits of what muscle tissue could do. By 1981, he had switched to a high-carb diet on the advice of a coach named Mike Vincer, and the results were dramatic enough that people started suggesting he must be on growth hormone. It wasn't growth hormone, it was pasta, and a training discipline of obsessive intensity that the sport had rarely seen before. People were watching. Among them was a young British teenager who had been buying every bodybuilding magazine he could find, studying Tom Platz's legs as though they pointed somewhere he intended to go. Dorian Yates grew up working class in the English Midlands. He came to bodybuilding through a combination of circumstance and what felt, in retrospect, like a natural fit. The way certain people find the pursuit that suits them completely. The man who shaped his early understanding of high-level training, whose ideas about intensity and commitment took hold in Yates before he had ever competed professionally, was Tom Platz. Platz has spoken about this directly, and his phrasing is worth noting. Dorian Yates, if I may say so, was more of a pragmatist than me. I don't want to say he was one of my students, though he was at every seminar I did in England when he was unknown. And I gave him some suggestions. He was at every seminar. An unknown from Birmingham showing up consistently, sitting in the audience, taking in everything Platz said about training philosophy, about intensity, about the relationship between the mind and the body under load. Platz gave him suggestions, small adjustments that may have influenced the trajectory of one of the most decorated careers in bodybuilding history. When Yates met Platz in person for the first time, after the seminars, the magazine pages, and years of admiration at a distance, he walked up to the man he considered his hero and said one word: "Hi," nothing more. Platz smiled. The moment passed. 2 men who would eventually sit together as peers and talk for hours, reduced in that first encounter to a single syllable and a nod. Years later, on the inaugural episode of Dorian Yates' podcast Shadow Talk, Tom Platz was the first guest Yates invited. Yates told him directly, "You were my hero, man." He explained that he tells the story of their first meeting often. The great Tom Platz, the man whose legs had redefined what the human body could achieve, had reduced Dorian Yates to a single syllable of awe. Their approaches to training were nearly opposite, which makes their mutual respect worth examining. Platz believed in volume, in pushing the body through set after grueling set, in high-rep squats that went on long enough to silence a gym. He trained with a pronounced intensity, visualizing workouts days in advance, wearing colors he felt made him stronger. Yates, who later said he was inspired initially by Platz's leg work, eventually moved in a completely different direction. He became a committed follower of Mike Mentz's high-intensity training, 1 or 2 all-out working sets taken beyond failure, performed 4 times a week, maximum intensity, minimum volume. 2 philosophies, 2 careers. Both proved effective and both men understood why. The lesson they shared was that the method mattered less than the willingness to go somewhere most people refused to go. Platz has spoken about what it meant to watch Yates win 6 consecutive Olympia titles. There is nothing distant or diplomatic in what he says. He says it makes him happy. He says it excites him. He says he gets to claim in some small way that he was part of the developmental process of one of the sport's greatest champions. He surpassed everything I taught him, Platz said. And the way he said it, he wasn't bitter. He was proud. That relationship, however, was not always this settled. In 1991, Platz approached Yates with an offer that, had Yates accepted it, might have changed the course of both their careers. September 15, 1990, Chicago, Illinois, the Ari Crown Theater. The 26th Mr. Olympia was drawing to a close. Lee Haney had just claimed his 8th consecutive title, and the crowd was beginning to thin. Then Tom Platz walked onto the stage, not to compete, not to congratulate, to make an announcement. He was there alongside Vince McMahon, the man who ran the World Wrestling Federation and had been quietly acquiring interests in the bodybuilding magazine business for months. The two had attended the event under the banner of a publication called Bodybuilding Lifestyles. They had a booth, they signed autographs. Nothing about their presence drew particular attention. Then, in the closing minutes of the sport's biggest event, Platz stepped to the microphone and announced the formation of the World Bodybuilding Federation, a direct rival to the IFBB, backed by the financial and media infrastructure of McMahon's organization. Press releases that had been distributed to journalists throughout the evening suddenly made sense. This was not a magazine launch. It was a coordinated challenge to the existing structure of professional bodybuilding. IFBB co-founder Ben Weider later described it as not a sophisticated or very honorable thing to do. He also said he wasn't angry. He let them have their fun. What followed was considerably less amusing. Platz was named Director of Talent Development for the WBF. His role was to approach the IFBB's top athletes with offers the federation couldn't match. The contracts under discussion were substantial, some reportedly reaching hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, far exceeding anything the IFBB paid its champions. The WBF was also promising larger prize money, higher production values, and an entertainment format modeled on professional wrestling, including character names and backstories for each competitor. One of the athletes Platz approached was Dorian Yates. At the time, Yates was living in the working-class Ladywood area of Birmingham with his wife Debbie and their son Lewis. Money was not plentiful. The WBF's offer was significant, the kind of figure that materially changes a family's circumstances. Yates considered it. He discussed it with his wife. She left the decision to him. He turned it down. He told Platz that he expected to become Mr. Olympia in the near term, and that achieving that was worth more than a guaranteed contract from a rival federation. He was confident in his genetics, his training, and his preparation. He was correct on all counts. The WBF, by contrast, collapsed quickly. Its first event in 1991 was reasonably well received, held at Donald Trump's Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, hosted by Regis Philbin, and promoted across WWF television with wrestlers appearing in support. But the crossover audience McMahon had anticipated, wrestling fans who would pay to watch competitive bodybuilding, did not materialize in meaningful numbers. The situation then deteriorated further. McMahon's personal doctor was convicted in 1991 of illegally distributing steroids to WWF wrestlers, and federal investigators turned their attention to McMahon himself. Operating a bodybuilding federation, a sport long associated with performance-enhancing while under federal scrutiny was no longer a viable position. McMahon announced the WBF would adopt a drug-free policy and implemented testing accordingly. Many of the competitors who had not been competing drug-free arrived at the 1992 event visibly diminished. One observer described them as having grown tiny, bloated, and sullen. The pay-per-view buy rate for that event was approximately 3,000. The 1992 WBF show drew around 3,000 pay-per-view buys. On July 15, 1992, McMahon called the Weiders and informed them the WBF was finished. The Weiders had already responded in their own way. At the 1991 Night of Champions, their own IFBB event, they placed 13 tombstones on the stage, each bearing the name of a bodybuilder who had signed with the WBF. The message required no elaboration. Tom Platz had made a calculated bet on disruption, the same instinct that had driven his approach to training when few others believed in it. This time the outcome was different, but one consequence is worth recording. The Weiders raised the Olympia prize money to $100,000 in direct response to WBF competition. Without that competitive pressure, the increase may never have materialized. The WBF failed as an organization, but it produced a concrete result for the athletes it had set out to serve. Dorian Yates, who had declined Platz's offer, went on to win the Olympia 6 consecutive years. After the WBF collapsed, Tom Platz moved away from the professional bodybuilding circuit. He took a position as a corporate recruiter, a transition that surprised those who had known him primarily as an intensely physical and public presence. He performed the work well, remained active, and continued to appear at contests from time to time. The spotlight had moved elsewhere, and he made no effort to reclaim it. What changed his trajectory was the emergence of the internet. Training footage from his competitive years, low resolution, shot in gyms long since closed, began circulating online. Videos of his squat sessions involving loads and volumes that seemed to exceed what most athletes could sustain reached a generation with no memory of his career. Young bodybuilders encountered these clips and responded to them the way Platz himself had responded to seeing Dave Draper on a beach at age 9. He gave a seminar in Culver City. The response was substantial. More invitations followed. Squat clinics, golden era retrospectives, talks on training and preparation. He traveled, he taught. Well into his 60s and 70s, he became one of the more sought-after figures in the sport he had helped shape. In early 2024, Dorian Yates launched a podcast called Shadow Talk. The format was straightforward. Yates, 6-time Mr. Olympia, in conversation with people who had influenced his career and his thinking. For the first episode, he chose Tom Platz. The conversation covered a wide range of ground. They discussed the early years at Gold's Gym and what training alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger had actually involved. Platz noted that Schwarzenegger's 6 days a week, twice-a-day training structure had made him feel, in his words, small and fat, not because the method was flawed in principle, but because it was wrong for his physiology. Shorter, stockier athletes, he explained, tend to respond better to 3 or 4 days per week of high-intensity work. High-frequency training was not suited to him. They spoke about performance-enhancing drugs openly, with the directness of men who have little left to defend. Platz described his own use as unsophisticated by contemporary standards and expressed concern that modern bodybuilders appear increasingly focused on what to take and how much, rather than how to train. Yates shared that view. Both noted that younger gym-goers today tend to be more interested in someone's cycle than their training methodology. They spoke about Arnold Schwarzenegger's generosity, how when he transitioned into acting, he passed his speaking and personal appearance contacts to Platz. Events that had been paying Arnold $10,000 for half a day's work began calling Platz instead. Arnold had simply told his contacts he was moving into film and asked whether they would work with Tom. Platz had agreed, and the income that followed was larger than he had expected. They spoke about Joe Weider, how he had built an empire from a living room in a hand-drawn magazine, and how at a 1990 event in New York he had seen something in Dorian Yates that other promoters had not. Weider invited him to Venice for magazine shoots, and those sessions helped launch the career of the man who would become known as the Shadow. They also spoke about aging, about what happens to a body built for extremes when time begins to take its toll. At 70, Platz trains once a week. He said that training twice a week had begun to make him dread the gym, that familiar feeling of not wanting to go. After taking a week off and cutting back to once a week, every session became an event again. He described maintaining what he called a childlike attitude in the candy store. It is a phrase that captures in 8 words most of what Tom Platz ever was as an athlete. Both agreed that as the body ages, mobility and function become more important than mass. Carrying significant weight on the frame, whether muscle or fat, places strain on the cardiovascular system that becomes genuinely dangerous in later life. Yates referenced conversations with doctors who identified sheer body mass as one of the primary drivers of heart problems among aging bodybuilders. Not necessarily what was taken, but the weight itself. Platz, who has shed considerable size since his competitive years, made a remark that drew a laugh from Yates. He said being smaller was, in his words, kind of fun, then immediately acknowledged that his training partners were appalled when he said it. In August 2024, Platz posted an Instagram reel that drew significant attention. Speaking directly to camera, he said what many in the bodybuilding community had long thought but few figures of his stature had said publicly, that science experiments were now on stage in every category. He was not referring only to the men's open division, the competitors who have grown large enough to raise concerns about internal organ health. He was addressing every division. In his view, the sport had shifted away from building the most impressive physical result and toward optimizing chemistry as efficiently as possible. It was the kind of criticism that carries more weight when it comes from someone who competed during the golden era, someone who acknowledged his own PED use openly, and who made no pretense that the past was clean. His concern was not moral, it was aesthetic. He loved bodybuilding, genuinely and deeply, and what he saw on stage no longer resembled what he had fallen in love with. It's been mentally, physically, spiritually, financially satisfying, he said. Everything I wanted it to be, it was. I liked being involved with something I love. I love this dearly. It was never about the money. That tension defines Tom Platz as well as anything. Nostalgic but not bitter. Critical but not cynical. He watched the sport he helped build move in directions he doesn't always recognize, and he still loves it. He still shows up, he still squats, once a week within whatever his 70-year-old body allows, and he still lights up when he talks about it. Across the ocean, Dorian Yates, the 6-time Olympia champion who turned down Platz's WBF offer and won the title anyway, runs his own supplement company, hosts his own podcast, and continues to train regularly. He remains in his own way as present in the bodybuilding conversation as he has ever been. The two men sat down together in early 2024 and spoke for hours. Two figures who had orbited each other for decades, the idol and the student, the recruiter and the refusal, the uncrowned champion and the man who crowned himself through sustained, relentless work. What came out of that conversation was as close to a time capsule from bodybuilding's golden era as the current generation is likely to get. The question that remains after tracing this story from beginning to end is a straightforward one. Tom Platz never won the Mr. Olympia. By the sport's official record, he is not a champion. He has no Sandow trophy, only third place in 1981, and a crowd that was still booing when he shook Franco Columbu's hand. Dorian Yates has 6 of those trophies, 6 consecutive years as the most dominant bodybuilder on the planet. By almost any conventional measure, Yates won and Platz did not. And yet Tom Platz's legs remain what people point to when they discuss the theoretical ceiling of human lower body development. More than 40 years after he competed, his training footage still circulates widely among people who were not yet born when he was on stage. His seminars shaped a generation of bodybuilders, including the one who became the most successful competitor of his era. His philosophy of intensity, of entering a painful place and refusing to leave, persists in gyms around the world, most often without attribution. Dorian Yates has called him his hero. He said it on his own podcast in front of his own audience. He said it directly to the man's face. What a legacy ultimately requires is worth considering. Whether it needs a title, or whether it needs to matter to the people who mattered to the sport.